When Johannes Gutenberg developed the mechanical movable type printing press in the mid-15th century, he set off one of the biggest shifts in human history. Before that, most knowledge was locked away in monasteries and reserved for a group of scholars and small elite circles. But with the press, books became easier to produce and ideas started to reach the general public. Meaning it was a massive leap forward, one that helped spread literacy, unify languages, and break the grip of old institutions that controlled information. But like any other change in the world, it comes with side effects that many don't see at all. Gutenberg's invention didn't just make reading easier, it also changed the way people interact with symbols and meaning. If anything, it turned language into something that could be repeated, mass-produced, and eventually stripped of its deeper context. And over centuries, that shift keeps evolving. Today, for example, the long road from the printing press has brought us to a very strange place, one of a digital world full of what many call brain rot, but maybe it's just the latest version of the same thing. What happens when symbols run wild, available to all, for anything and everything. Look, I get it. This may sound hyperbolic, what I'm about to say in this video, but I think the genealogy holds. What the printing press introduced was not just a tool, but a redefinition of what counts as communication. Literacy was no longer limited to the skilled few or those who could decipher Latin scrolls or oral codes of conduct. It now meant participation in a symbolic order shaped by reproducibility. Sociologically, the printing press inaugurated a transition from oral and ritual-based meaning to representational and more modular meaning. That transition continues to unfold today across digital platforms where signs and symbols are no longer the markers of reality, but fragments in a game of cultural free association. Think of it this way. If Gutenberg gave us the book, then TikTok is its funhouse mirror, sped up, fragmented, aestheticized beyond comprehension, where symbols evoke feelings first and meaning second, if any at all. So to understand how one gets to, for example, we first need to understand how literacy itself has changed. Traditional literacy was tied to the written word, but the digital age demands a different form of literacy, one that sociologists and media theorists increasingly describe as semiotic literacy, the ability to interpret, remix, and respond to signs in an ever-shifting landscape of cultural reference. Semiotics, the study of how meaning is made through signs, symbols, and codes, becomes essential in our world. Think of a meme. It's never just an image or sound, but a compound sign. It references or mocks, aestheticizes or displaces. Meaning is not fixed in this case. It's inferred, felt, guessed through context, visual rhythm, tone, and sometimes gesture. So the same meme might express sincerity, sarcasm, irony, or nihilism depending on who posts it and how it is captioned and what cultural moment it rides on. Where the printed book invited rational contemplation, digital media invites immediate, effective response. It's not what the meme means that matters, but how it feels. The type of brain rot earlier described may mean nothing to many, but it does have a tone, a texture, and a cadence. It carries a semantic presence without semantic content. All of this creates a huge challenge for institutions that archive, preserve, and validate cultural artifacts. The very act of archiving assumes that some things are more worthy of memory than others, so that there is a cultural hierarchy, or at the very least, a criterion. But what happens when our cultural production becomes chaotic, ambiguous, ephemeral, and deeply embedded in non-textual performance? And so this is the paradox of the meme era that we live in today in 2025. In my personal opinion, I think memes are among the most culturally relevant outputs of our time. They shape elections, they inform public sentiment, and they scaffold online identity formation. Yet they resist traditional forms of preservation. A phrase like brain rot doesn't just describe content fatigue. It is a self-aware mode of engagement. It says, I know this is dumb, but I find meaning in the dumbness. So in that sense, isn't a regression from literacy, but I think it's a new form of it. A hyper-mediated, irony-coded echo of shared attention across the globe. The implication for archivists and digital anthropologists and even sociologists is pretty clear now. The question is no longer what is worthy of archiving, but how we redefine worthiness in a culture that refuses fixed meaning. Traditional archives prized coherence, authorship, and continuity. Memes don't at all. They prioritize and prize fragmentation, anonymity, and momentary resonance. This is not just a shift in humor and how people think. It's a transformation of our semiotic economy, and it echoes Gutenberg's most overlooked contribution, the freeing of the symbol from its divine tether. Before Gutenberg, books were rare and pretty sacred. They were imbued with meaning not only through their content, but their scarcity as well. Once the printing press introduced reproducibility, symbols, to borrow Walter Benjamin's term, lost their aura. They could be repeated, remixed, mass-produced, but this didn't destroy meaning, it changed its velocity. Meaning was no longer grounded in authority or scarcity, it was a matter of circulation. The more symbol was printed, the more powerful it became. Not because it was true, but because it was visible. So what does this all mean for literacy, education, and cultural identity? It means we are entering a post-Gutenberg age. Younger generations could be semiotically literate even if they are textually disengaged. This isn't necessarily bad, but it is different. It requires us to rethink how we value knowledge and how we define learning and what we choose to remember. So in traditional archive logic, culture is filtered, curated, and stored for future reference. But memes are more like rituals than documents. They don't just signify, they can also enact. How do you archive a ritual that lives only in the moment of transmission, that changes meaning with every repetition? And that's the real danger here. The cultural gatekeepers, libraries, museums, and academics will dismiss the entire strata of expression as trivial, ephemeral, or unworthy. But to ignore it is to probably erase how contemporary generations actually think, feel, and express collective anxiety, joy, or even just boredom. Meme culture could be considered the new folklore. It has myths, archetypes, rituals, heroes, tricksters, and a canon. It really has a history. Yet, our system of archiving has not really evolved to preserve vibe. They're still structured to and for archiving objects for stable reference. The question becomes, if that's the case, what would an archive of cultural feeling look like? How do you preserve the texture of a moment, the ambient dread of ironic detachment, or the communal joy of shared absurdity? These are not just media questions, they're philosophical ones, rooted in what we believe deserves to be remembered. Gutenberg's press shifted the power from scribes to printers, so from the elite guardians to the general public. The internet, as Marshall McLuhan might say, is the next phase in that revolution. Memes are the movable type of our era. They mutate symbols at scale. They shift meaning by remix, and they teach us that literacy was never really about decoding words, it was about navigating symbols. So if we fail to take memes seriously, not only will we misunderstand the present, we'll misunderstand the very arc of human communication. So the next time BRAINROT memes scroll past your feed, one should remember it's not a symptom of decay, it's the sound of semiotic evolution echoing through the noisy cathedral Gutenberg built. What I think we need is actually a new pedagogy with this, one that doesn't treat memes as junk food, but as a raw cultural syntax. If traditional literacy taught us how to decode text, then semiotic literacy must teach us how to navigate noise. We must learn to ask, why did the sound go viral? What gestures are common across this genre of meme? What anxieties does it express? What truths does it distort? Educators, artists, and theorists need to engage with these questions, not from a place of moral panic, but from curiosity and respect. The absurd is not the enemy of knowledge, it's often its mirror, showing us where language breaks down and where logic usually fails to account for lived experience. So as much as I'm using the term brain rot, I really just think it's kind of a lie. It's a pretty shallow reading of it. Rather than rotting, I think the brain is adapting, morphing into a medium-sensitive organ that reads atmosphere instead of argument, vibe instead of value. I mean, we still read value and argument, but the point is this, that atmosphere and vibe are equally as important as argument and value. This isn't a degeneration, but a transformation. And it's not really rot, but rather semiotic saturation, where the sheer volume of mediated symbols overwhelms traditional interpretive frameworks. So think of Dadaism after World War I in Europe, or like situationism in post-industrial France. Today's meme culture may be the digital successor to these movements, a refusal of reason in a world that seems increasingly irrational. So think of temporality, right? The printing press helped enforce linearity. A book has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But a meme can loop, and it can be part of your infinite scroll, and collapse into an eternal present. A sound like does not need to move you forward. It keeps you suspended, and so this has a profound effect on cognition. We become accustomed to stasis disguised as flow, movement without progress. In Marshall McLuhan's terms, the medium is the message, but the medium is the meme, and it colonizes not just our thoughts, but our gestures, voices, and even bodily rhythms. So users don't merely watch brain rot, they can perform it. You can lip sync, reenact, distort, embody. And this is pretty important because Gutenberg's press disembodied the voice, translating oral culture into typographic abstraction. The digital meme re-embodies that, but in a glitchy, fragmented form. So look, I'm not trying to blame Gutenberg for brain rot specifically. I'm not accusing him of corruption. It's to recognize the continuity of technological consequence. His invention began the abstraction of language into reproducible form. That abstraction has continued through radio, TV, internet, and now memes, until language itself becomes something worn thin, flexible, ridiculous, and in a way, probably holy. Because we've reached a new plateau of meaning, where the sacred and the stupid can coexist, where a gibberish sound can feel more real than a textbook to many, where cultural memory is etched in repetition and not reason. So, where literacy, finally, is not about knowing, but navigating symbols in the chaos that is the digital world, with grace.